The world has forgotten the warmth of the sun, leaving only a pale, indifferent disk hanging in a sky of bruised purple and slate grey. This is the Pleistocene, a geological breath held in the lungs of the earth where the ice sheets have descended from the north like a slow, crushing tide of crystal and stone. The landscape is a flat, endless expanse of compacted snow, scoured by winds that scream across the tundra with the velocity of a hunting hawk. There are no trees here to break the gale, only the skeletal remains of scrub brush that snap like brittle bone under the weight of the frost. It is a time of absolute stillness, where the only mercy granted to the living is the brief, agonizing end of death. The temperature has plummeted to a depth that defies the biological machinery of most living things, turning the air itself into a weapon that flays the skin and freezes the moisture in the eyes. Every breath is a battle, a transaction where the body trades precious internal heat for a lungful of razor-sharp oxygen that tastes of iron and ozone. The ground is permafrost, a solid block of frozen soil extending downward for hundreds of meters, rejecting any root that dares to seek water. In this white silence, sound carries with terrifying clarity. The crack of a glacier shifting miles away sounds like a thunderclap, and the soft crunch of a footstep echoes like a drumbeat, inviting predators to a feast. Moving across this desolate canvas is a smudge of contrast, a ragged line of dark shapes trudging against the wind with the desperate persistence of the doomed. They are the Wanderers, a small band of Homo erectus, upright apes, who have ventured too far into the killing fields of the north. They are not the masters of this domain. They are intruders, barely tolerated by an ecosystem designed to extinguish them. Their bodies are covered in matted hair and crude furs stripped from scavenged kills, but the cold finds every gap, every tear biting into their flesh with invisible teeth. They walk in a single file, a survival formation intended to break the wind for those behind stepping into the footprints of the leader to conserve kinetic energy. The leader, a massive male with scars mapping the history of a violent life, moves with a mechanical grimness, his eyes scanning the horizon for a silhouette that is not ice. He is starving his body, consuming its own muscle mass, to keep the furnace of his metabolism burning, a physiological cannibalism required to survive the winter. His ribcage is a visible architecture beneath his taut skin, heaving with the effort of lifting legs that feel as heavy as granite pillars. There is no thought of conquest in his mind, no grand philosophy of existence. There is only the binary logic of the nervous system: keep moving or cease to be. Behind him, the pack creates a cocoon of shared warmth. The females and the younger males huddled close their breath, merging into a single cloud of steam that trails behind them like a spirit. In the center of this formation, protected like a beating heart, is the Firekeeper, a female who clutches a smoldering bundle of moss and dung wrapped in layers of hide. This is the Red Flower, the only god they know, a stolen piece of the sun that separates them from the beasts of the darkness. If the ember dies, the tribe dies. The equation is absolute, written in the frozen statutes of the night. She walks with a terrifying caution, shielding the smoke from the gale, her hands blackened and blistered, feeling the heat fade with every mile. The environment they traverse is a graveyard of the great megafauna, where the carcasses of mammoths lie half buried in drifts, their tusks protruding like monuments to a fallen empire. These giants have migrated south, chasing the receding grasslands, leaving the hominids behind in a void of protein and fat. The Wanderers have gnawed on old bones, cracking them open with stone tools to extract the last rancid smear of marrow, but the energy gain is negligible compared to the caloric cost of the cold. The hunger is not just a sensation, it is a presence, a hollow creature, living inside their stomachs, clawing at their spines, demanding fuel that the white world refuses to yield. They are being stalked not by a wolf or a cat, but by the creeping lethargy of hypothermia, a seductress that whispers the promise of sleep and the cessation of pain. It starts in the extremities, the numbness of the toes and fingers as the body shunts blood to the vital organs, sacrificing the limbs to save the core. The hominids stumble, their coordination failing as the electrical signals in their nerves slow down, the synaptic gaps widening in the freezing air. To stop is to accept the seduction, to curl up in a drift and let the snow cover the body in a shroud of white peace. The leader grunts, shoving a lagging male forward, a brutal act of love that forces the blood to circulate, denying the mercy of the sleep. The wind shifts, carrying with it the scent of ancient ice and the metallic tang of an approaching storm that will bury the plains in another layer of oblivion. The sky darkens, the purple bruising deepening into a charcoal black, signaling the arrival of the long night where the temperature will drop to levels that shatter stone. The tribe needs shelter, a depression in the earth, a cave, anything that can break the wind and allow them to feed the ember into a flame. But the tundra is flat, a cruel plateau of exposure where there is nowhere to hide from the gaze of the universe. They are specks of dust on a polished mirror, visible, vulnerable, and utterly alone. To the west, the geography begins to fracture, the flat horizon erupting into the jagged violence of a mountain range that tears the belly of the sky. These are the Forbidden Peaks, a vertical world of avalanche and wind shear traditionally avoided by the plains-dwelling ancestors who feared the spirits of the high air. The mountains are dark, foreboding fortresses of rock, where the snow clings to sheer faces and the clouds decapitate the summits. Yet it is there in the chaos of the stone that the wind might be broken. It is there in the complex topography that a cave might exist. The leader stops, his heavy brow furrowing as he looks toward the terrifying ascent. The decision is not made with language, for their vocabulary is a collection of grunts, gestures, and complex eye movements, but with a collective realization of their reality. The plains offer only a certainty of death, a flat line of extinction, where the wind will strip the flesh from their bones before the moon rises. The mountains offer a chance, a gamble against gravity and altitude, but a chance nonetheless to find a womb of stone. The leader turns his body away from the migration path of the vanished herds and faces the wall of rock. The tribe hesitates, the ancestral fear of the high places, warring with the immediate terror of the freezing wind. They begin to move again, the rhythm of the march changing as the ground beneath their feet hardens, shifting from the crunch of snow to the metallic clatter of scree and ice-slicked rock. The incline is slight at first, a deceptive gentleness that burns the calves and forces the lungs to work harder in the thinning air. They are leaving the world of the horizontal, the two-dimensional plane of the hunt, and entering the three-dimensional world of the climb. This is a violation of their biological design. Their feet are evolved for endurance, running not for gripping the treacherous edges of limestone ledges. As they ascend the foothills, the wind intensifies, channeled by the valleys into concentrated tunnels of air that buffet the tribe, threatening to knock them off balance. The vegetation changes, the scrub brush disappearing entirely, replaced by lichen that clings to the rocks like scabs, offering no fuel for the fire. The firekeeper stumbles, clutching the bundle to her chest, her eyes wide with the panic of losing the ember. A male reaches out, steadying her, his hand grasping her arm with a strength that bruises a silent reminder of the burden she carries. They are a single organism, a chain of life, where the failure of one link spells the doom of the entire sequence. The sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows that stretch across the snow like the grasping fingers of the darkness. The temperature drops instantly, the air tightening like a noose, the moisture in their nostrils freezing into jagged crystals that prick with every inhalation. They must find a lee, a temporary shelter for the night before the full weight of the cold crushes them. The leader spots an overhang, a slab of granite jutting out from the cliff face, offering a miserable alcove, barely large enough to contain the huddled mass of the tribe. It is not a home. It is a waiting room for the morning, a shallow depression in the hostility of the mountain. They collapse under the rock, piling together in a chaotic heap of limbs and fur, the hierarchy of the pack dissolving into a desperate communion of body heat. The firekeeper unwraps the bundle, revealing a glowing heart of crimson that pulses weak and erratic in the oxygen-starved air. She feeds it a handful of dried moss, carried from the lowlands, blowing gently her breath, a prayer to the chemical reaction that sustains them. The smoke curls up acrid and thin, but the tiny flame that erupts is a miracle, a miniature star that pushes back the encroaching night. The eyes of the tribe reflect the orange glow, dilated and fearful, watching the fire as if it were a living thing that might decide to leave them. Outside the circle of light, the mountain howls, the sound of the wind tearing through the crags, resembling the screams of dying animals. This is a sound they have never heard on the plains, a polyphonic chorus of stone and air that vibrates in their chests. They are small, insignificant intrusions in a geological drama that has played out for millions of years without an audience. The cold creeps around the edges of the overhang, probing for weakness, turning the sweat on their skin into icy rivulets. They shiver violently, the involuntary spasms generating the only heat they can produce, their muscles vibrating in a frantic attempt to stay alive. The leader sits at the edge of the huddle, his back to the wind, acting as a living shield for the group. He looks out into the darkness, his vision adjusted to the gloom, watching the swirling snow that erases the world below. He knows that they cannot go back. The path they climbed is now a slide of ice, treacherous and deadly in the dark. Their only option is to go up, to climb higher, into the throat of the mountain, toward a destination he cannot see but must believe exists. Somewhere above, in the jagged peaks that pierce the clouds, there must be a sanctuary, a place where the eagle nests and the wind cannot reach. In the middle of the night, a sound cuts through the howling wind, a screech that is neither wind nor wolf, originating from the unseen heights above. It is a cry of dominance, sharp and metallic, echoing off the canyon walls, with a terrifying volume that silences the whimpering of the young. The tribe stiffens their heads, snapping up their primal instincts, recognizing a predator that does not belong to the world they know. This is the voice of the high country, the auditory signature of a creature that rules the vertical realm. The leader grips his hand, axe the stone cold against his palm, his eyes narrowing as he stares into the abyss above. The fire flickers, consuming the last of the moss, threatening to return them to the darkness. The firekeeper frantically adds a piece of dry bone, the porous material catching slowly, the flame turning a sickly blue before stabilizing. They are running out of fuel. The mountain demands a tribute they cannot pay, and the cold is a creditor that offers no extensions. To stay here is to freeze, to descend is to starve. The only path is the one that leads to the source of the screech, to the lair of the beast that claims this stone wilderness. The dawn brings no warmth, only a grey illumination that reveals the sheer scale of the challenge ahead. The mountain rises like a wall of iron capped with glaciers that shine with a blinding hostile brilliance. The tribe uncurls from their frozen slumber, their joints stiff, their energy reserves critically low. They consume snow to hydrate the cold water, cramping their stomachs, sending shivers through their cores. They stand shaky and fragile, gathering the meager possessions that define their existence. A few flint nodules, a scraper, the smoldering bundle. The leader takes the first step onto the icy ledge, his foot slipping slightly before finding purchase on a ridge of rock. He does not look back at the white grave of the plains. He looks up, his gaze fixed on a distant black speck, circling the highest peak, a sentinel in the sky. The migration has ended, the ascent has begun. They are no longer wanderers of the flat earth. They are climbers, ascending into the domain of monsters, driven by the desperate hope that in the nest of the eagle they might find the means to survive the end of the world. The transition from the horizontal world of the tundra to the vertical reality of the mountain is not merely a change in geography, but a fundamental rewriting of the laws of physics governing the tribe. The ground, once a reliable platform for their stride, has rotated 90 degrees to become a wall of hostile granite that rejects the anatomy of the bipedal ape. Their feet evolved over eons to traverse the flat savannas and absorb the impact of running, are now clumsy instruments, seeking purchase on narrow lips of stone slick with rime ice. The tribe moves slowly, pressed flat against the rock face. Their center of gravity shifted perilously close to the precipice, transforming from runners into climbers in a desperate, clumsy metamorphosis. The muscles of the upper body, long neglected in favor of the endurance-focused legs, scream in protest as they are forced to bear the weight of survival. Fingers accustomed to gripping spears and scraping hides now bleed as they wedge into freezing cracks, the skin tearing on sharp crystals of quartz. Every upward movement is a defiance of gravity, a calculation of friction and balance made by a brain starving for oxygen. The leader tests each handhold with a savage jerk before committing his weight, his grunts of exertion lost immediately in the wind that scours the cliff face. This is a battle against the planet's gravitational pull, a force that waits patiently for a single error, a single slip of a callus to claim its due. In this alien verticality, the tools of the hunt are repurposed with a crude but brilliant ingenuity that marks the adaptability of the species. The Acheulean hand axe, a teardrop-shaped stone normally used for butchering carcasses and smashing bone, finds a new function as an extension of the arm. The males slam the flint edges into the ice-choked crevices, chipping away the glaze to create footholds where none existed, turning the weapon of the kill into a tool of transit. This is the dawn of technical mountaineering, born not of sport or exploration, but of the terror of the void opening up beneath their heels. The rhythmic clack-clack-clack of stone against stone echoes like the ticking of a geological clock. The The firekeeper struggles the most, her mobility compromised by the precious burden she cradles against her chest, effectively rendering her one-handed in a world that demands two. She is tethered to the strongest male by a length of braided rawhide, a lifeline that connects the future of the tribe to its present strength. She moves with a terrifying delicacy, her eyes fixed on the rock inches from her face, refusing to look down at the dizzying drop that awaits a mistake. The smoke from the ember trails behind her, whipped into a frenzy by the updrafts, a thin grey ribbon marking their precarious path up the spine of the world. As they ascend past the tree line, the ecosystem undergoes a stark and brutal simplification, stripping away the complexity of life until only the elemental remains. The hardy lichens and mosses that clung to the lower slopes vanish, leaving only bare rock and ancient ice that has not melted in 10,000 years. The air thins the partial pressure of oxygen, dropping to levels that induce hypoxia, making the blood thick and sludge-like in their veins. They begin to hallucinate, seeing movement in the peripheral vision shadows that dance on the rock face where there are only stones. The silence here is different. It is not the quiet of the plains, but a vacuum of sound where the wind roars with the deafening volume of a waterfall. The organization of the pack tightens, the spatial distance between individuals collapsing until they are touching a continuous chain of flesh moving against the stone. The hierarchy of the hunt is suspended. Here the most valuable member is not the strongest killer, but the one with the surest grip. They communicate through touch, a tap on the shoulder to signal a loose rock, a shove to correct a balance, a grip on the ankle to stabilize a step. They are a single organism spanning 30 feet of cliff, a collective intelligence focused entirely on the placement of 20 fingers and 20 toes. If one falls, the psychological shockwave could dislodge them all. They are bound together by the physics of their shared peril. The sun rises higher, cresting the peaks above and bathing the eastern face of the mountain in a brilliant, blinding light that holds a hidden danger. On the plains, the sun is a savior, a source of warmth that fights the frost. Here, on the unstable slopes of the cryosphere, the sun is a destabilizing agent. The sudden rise in temperature strikes the frozen waterfalls and ice sheets that glue the loose rocks together, causing the bonds of the ice to weaken and fracture. The mountain begins to weep, rivulets of meltwater trickling down the stone, lubricating the surfaces and turning firm footholds into treacherous slides. The world is waking up, and its waking movements are lethal to the tiny figures clinging to its skin. A low rumble begins deep within the throat of the mountain, a vibration that travels through the rock and into the bones of the climbers, bypassing the ears entirely. It is the groan of geological tension being released, the sound of millions of tons of snow and stone, shifting their weight in response to the solar touch. The leader freezes, pressing his cheek against the cold granite, listening to the heartbeat of the avalanche. He knows this sound from the stories of the ancestors, the white death that swallows valleys whole. There is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. They are exposed on the face of the Leviathan, defenseless against the physics of the slide. Above them, a shelf of snow suspended for months in a delicate equilibrium surrenders to gravity, detaching from the rock with a soft, sighing lump. It begins as a cascade of white powder, beautiful and silent, spilling over the edge like sugar, but it quickly gathers mass, picking up rocks and ice boulders as it accelerates. The sound transforms from a whisper to a roar, a chaotic frequency that drowns out the wind and the terrified screams of the hominids. The leader roars a warning, a futile gesture against the thunder, and drives his hand axe deep into a fissure, anchoring himself to the mountain. The impact is not a direct hit, but a glancing blow, the periphery of the avalanche scouring the ledge where the tribe stands. The white cloud engulfs them, a blinding, choking blizzard of pulverized ice that fills their mouths and noses, instantly dropping the temperature and blinding their vision. They are battered by stones the size of fists, their bodies slammed against the cliff face, their grip tested to the absolute limit of anatomical failure. It is a moment of pure chaos, where the distinction between up and down vanishes, and the world becomes a swirling vortex of white violence. In the confusion, the braided rawhide tether snaps with a sharp crack, the leather fibers failing under the sudden shock load of a slipping body. A young male, one of the carriers who had been supporting the rear, is swept from the ledge, his fingers scrabbling uselessly against the ice-slicked stone. He makes no sound as he falls, the wind snatching his breath away, his body becoming a receding dark speck against the white expanse of the avalanche below. There is no time for mourning, no capacity for grief. The event is registered only as a loss of biomass, a reduction in the tribe's collective strength. The mountain has taken its toll, a blood tax paid for the arrogance of the ascent. The dust settles, the roar fading into the deep valleys below, leaving a ringing silence in the ears of the survivors. They are caked in snow, shivering violently, their faces masks of shock and white powder looking like ghosts resurrected from the ice. The firekeeper is huddled in a fetal ball, shielding the ember with her own body. Her skin blue from the exposure, but a thin wisp of smoke still curls from the bundle. The fire has survived. The leader checks the head count, his eyes lingering for a fraction of a second on the empty space where the young male stood before turning his face back to the summit. They cannot stay here. The ledge is compromised, covered in loose debris and unstable snow that could slide again at any moment. The fear of the fall is now replaced by a primal urgency to get off the vertical face, to find level ground where the gravity is not an active enemy. They move faster now, driven by adrenaline and the terror of the White Death, their movements less precise but more powerful. They scramble up the remaining chimney of rock, using knees and elbows, hauling themselves up with a desperate animalistic strength that overrides the pain in their exhausted muscles. Finally, the angle of the slope begins to lessen the vertical wall, giving way to a high-altitude plateau, a desolate field of boulders and wind-scoured ice. They pull themselves over the final lip, collapsing onto the flat ground, their chests heaving, gasping for the thin air. They have breached the fortress of the peaks, leaving the world of the plains far below, hidden beneath a blanket of clouds that looks like a frozen ocean. They are islands in the sky, isolated from everything they have ever known, standing on the roof of the world where the sky is a dark, bruising violet. But there is no victory in this arrival, only a new and terrifying context for their survival. The wind here is unimpeded, screaming across the plateau with a velocity that can strip flesh, and the temperature is lethal. As they stumble to their feet looking for the shelter of the great cave system, the leader had hoped for a shadow passes over them. It is not a cloud, for it moves against the wind, a massive cruciform shape that glides with a predatory silence across the sun. The leader looks up, shielding his eyes, and sees the silhouette of the true master of this domain. The eagle is vast, a remnant of a megafauna bloodline that dwarfs modern raptors, its wingspan stretching wide enough to block the light. It does not flap. It rides the thermal currents with an arrogant stillness, its head banking to look down at the intruders who have crawled into its larder. The hominids freeze their instincts, screaming that they have traded the dangers of the ice for a danger with claws and eyes. They have entered the eagle's nest, and they are not guests. They are slow-moving, soft-skinned protein exposed on a platter of stone. They have entered the death zone, a biological demarcation line where the atmospheric pressure is insufficient to sustain prolonged exertion. At this altitude, the air is a rarefied gas stripped of the density required to shield living tissue from the harsh ultraviolet radiation of the sun. The sky above is no longer the familiar blue of the lowlands, but a deep, unsettling indigo that verges on black, revealing the emptiness of space just beyond the atmosphere. The tribe moves through a lunar landscape of shattered slate and erratic boulders, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps that fail to satisfy the screaming demand of their muscles. Every step is a negotiation with hypoxia, their vision tunneling, their cognitive functions reduced to the reptilian core of fear and reaction. Hovering above this desolation, detached from the struggle of gravity, is the architect of their terror. It is a Teratorn, a nightmare of the Pleistocene sky, a raptor whose dimensions defy the logic of modern ornithology. With a wingspan stretching nearly 25 feet, it is less a bird and more a biological glider, a living kite constructed of hollow bone and stiffened keratin. It does not flap, for the energy cost would be catastrophic. Instead, it rides the thermal columns rising from the sun-baked rocks, circling with a terrifying, motionless grace. Its shadow cast upon the grey stones below is a moving eclipse, a patch of darkness that slides over the huddled figures of the tribe, chilling them more effectively than the wind. The hominids' apex predators on the savannah are instantly demoted to the status of rodents in this high-altitude arena. Their evolutionary toolkit, the ability to run, to throw, to coordinate encircling maneuvers, is rendered obsolete by an enemy that occupies the Z-axis. On the flat plains, a threat is a point on the horizon approaching at a predictable speed. Here, the threat is omnipresent, occupying the entire dome of the sky. They press themselves into the fissures of the rock, instinctively adopting the behavior of prey animals, freezing their movement to break the visual lock of the hunter. Their fur, matted with the dust of the climb, acts as a crude camouflage, blending them into the granite background. The anatomy of the predator is a masterpiece of lethal engineering refined over millions of years of aerial supremacy. Its eyes, set deep within a skull the size of a man's torso, possess a visual acuity 8 times that of a human, capable of detecting the expansion and contraction of a ribcage from 3,000 feet. It sees the world not just in color, but in the ultraviolet spectrum, tracking the urine trails of mountain goats and the heat signatures of warm-blooded intruders. To the bird, the tribe members are not people. They are contrasting thermal blobs against the cold rock, soft packets of protein and calcium waiting to be harvested. For hours, the standoff continues, a psychological siege where the only weapon is patience. The bird loiters in the sky, a dark cross pinned against the sun, waiting for a mistake, a movement, a separation in the group. The tribe is paralyzed, trapped in the open, unable to advance toward the shelter of the cliffs without exposing themselves to the dive. The cold seeps into their bones, the wind biting at their exposed skin, but they dare not move to warm themselves. The firekeeper shields the ember with her body, terrifyingly aware that a column of smoke would be a beacon, a signal fire inviting death to descend. The leader watches the sky, his neck craning back at an unnatural angle, the muscles cramping from the strain of the vigil. He understands the physics of the situation. They are slow, the ground is uneven, and there is no cover. He grips his spear, a heavy shaft of hardened wood tipped with flint, but the weapon feels pitifully inadequate. How do you spear a thunderbolt? How do you fight a creature that strikes from the blinding glare of the sun? The vulnerability is absolute. It is a sensation of nakedness, a stripping away of the arrogance that comes with being a tool-using ape. Here, tools are heavy burdens, and intelligence is just the capacity to understand one's own doom. The attack, when it comes, begins not with a sound, but with a shift in geometry. The great bird alters the angle of its wings, collapsing the vast span into a sleek, aerodynamic delta shape, instantly surrendering to gravity. It drops from the thermal column, converting potential energy into kinetic velocity with terrifying efficiency. The dive is silent at first, a free fall through the thin air, but as the speed increases, the atmosphere begins to scream. It is a tearing sound, like a canvas sheet being ripped apart by a giant hand, a sonic warning that arrives only fractions of a second before the impact. The tribe scatters in a panic that overrides their discipline, the terrifying noise shattering their nerve. They dive behind boulders, scramble into crevices, throwing themselves flat against the unforgiving stone. But one male, a scout who had ventured too far from the cluster to find a path, is caught in the open. He looks up, his eyes widening in the final millisecond of his life, seeing the sky blocked out by a rushing wall of feathers and talons. There is no time to raise a spear, no time to scream, only time to register the inevitability of the collision. The impact is distinct and sickening, the sound of meat and bone meeting a force traveling at 80 miles per hour. The talons, curved scimitars of black keratin, as long as a tiger's claws, drive through the thick furs and into the torso with the force of hydraulic pistons. The momentum of the bird does not stop. It barely shudders as it connects, translating the horizontal speed into a vertical lift. The scout is jerked from the ground, his weight negligible to the creature's lift capacity, his feet kicking uselessly at the air as he is airborne. For the tribe, the horror is visual and immediate. They watch as one of their own is levitated, transformed from a ground-dwelling primate into a victim of the sky. The man screams a high, thin sound that is quickly swallowed by the wind, his body growing smaller with every second as the bird banks and climbs back toward the sun. Drops of bright arterial blood rain down on the grey rocks, a gruesome precipitation that marks the spot of the abduction. It is a display of power so absolute that it borders on the supernatural. A reminder that the food chain is a vertical hierarchy, and they are no longer at the top. The bird does not eat immediately. It carries the prize toward the high peaks, toward the citadel of cliffs that loom at the far end of the plateau. This is the behavior of a nester, a parent returning to the eyrie to feed a demanding brood. The realization hits the leader with the force of a physical blow. They are not just in the hunting ground, they are in the nursery. The plateau is the larder for the next generation of monsters. The shadow of the wing passes over them one last time, a farewell gesture of dominance, before the predator disappears into the jagged skyline. Silence returns to the plateau, but it is now a loaded, heavy silence thick with the trauma of the event. The survivors slowly emerge from their cover, their movements jerky and trembling, their eyes darting wildly at the empty sky. The cohesion of the group has been fractured. The trust in their collective strength has been shattered by the undeniable reality that they cannot defend each other. The strongest male could do nothing but watch. The spears remained unthrown. The technology of the Stone Age is useless against the physics of flight. They are shaken to their core, their confidence drained like blood from a wound. But the cold does not pause for grief, and the wind does not respect their terror. The sun is beginning its descent, and to remain on the open plateau during the night is a death sentence from freezing. The leader rallies them, his voice rough and guttural, shoving the paralyzed members into motion. They must move. They must get off this killing field. The direction is dictated by the geography. The only shelter visible is the very same cliff system where the bird vanished. It is a cruel irony of survival. The only place safe from the wind is the home of the beast. They advance with a new, agonizing caution, staying within the shadows of the largest boulders, moving in short, frantic bursts. They are no longer walking. They are scurrying, their bodies hunched low, trying to occupy as little volume as possible. Every shadow that flickers across the ground causes them to flinch. Every gust of wind sounds like the rushing of wings. The psychological toll is immense, a cortisol flood that leaves them exhausted and jittery. The journey across the plateau becomes a gauntlet of paranoia, a mental breakdown played out in slow motion against a backdrop of stunning, indifferent beauty. As they draw closer to the cliff face, the scale of the eagle's nest becomes apparent. It is a massive cavern mouth, situated halfway up a sheer wall of granite, protected by an apron of jagged rocks. Below the cave, the ground is littered with the debris of centuries of predation, bleached bones of mountain goats, shattered skulls of wolves, and the fresh red ruin of their fallen kin. The smell is overpowering, a stench of ammonia, rotting meat, and old death that washes over them in waves. This is the High Citadel, the throne room of the Sky King, and they are creeping towards the front door. The leader stops at the base of the cliff, looking up at the dark maw of the cave. He knows what lies inside. He knows the danger is absolute, but he also feels the temperature dropping, the moisture in the air turning to ice dust. The storm that has been chasing them since the plains is catching up a wall of white obliteration visible in the valley below. The choice is binary: face the monster in its lair and fight for the shelter, or stay outside and let the winter finish what the eagle started. It is a choice between a hot death and a cold one. He turns to the tribe, his eyes locking with the firekeeper. She nods, understanding the silent command. She blows gently on the ember, coaxing a glow from the dying moss. Fire, the red flower. It is the one thing the beast does not possess, the one magic that belongs to the Earthwalkers. It is their only leverage, their only hope of turning the tables. The leader signals the advance, gripping his spear with renewed purpose. They are done hiding. If they are to die, they will die standing with fire in their hands, in the heart of the enemy's fortress. The hunt is over. The war for the cave is about to begin. The final ascent to the mouth of the cavern is a pilgrimage through a graveyard of the devoured. The slope leading to the entrance is paved with the calcified refuse of the predator's reign, shattered femurs of mountain goats, the crushed skulls of ancient wolves, and the disjointed vertebrae of creatures that no longer walk the earth. The air here is thick, heavy with the stinging scent of ammonia and the copper tang of old blood, a chemical warning that triggers the deepest alarm bells in the mammalian brain. The tribe crawls over this carpet of death, their hands gripping the bones of their predecessors to pull themselves up the scree, their breathing shallow and terrified. They are entering the digestive tract of the mountain, a place where the food chain ends in a pile of white calcium and silence. The entrance itself is a jagged wound in the granite face, 50 feet high, and wide enough to swallow the light of the dying day. The wind, which has screamed without pause for days, suddenly changes its note as it crosses the threshold, dropping to a hollow, mournful bass frequency that vibrates in the chest cavities of the intruders. The leader steps over the lip of the cave, first his silhouette framed against the raging storm outside, a small, trembling figure challenging the darkness. He holds his spear with white-knuckled intensity, the wood slick with sweat, despite the freezing temperature, the stone tip pointing into the gloom. Behind him, the others filter in, spreading out in a defensive semicircle, their backs pressing against the cold rock walls. Inside the cave is a cathedral of shadows, vast and echoing, stretching back into the mountain, far beyond the reach of the twilight. But it is not empty. In the center of the stony floor, rising from a nest built of pine boughs and stripped skeletons, is the matriarch. She is larger than the male that hunted them on the plateau, a brooding mountain of feathers and muscle, her eyes reflecting the faint light with a malevolent reptilian intelligence. She does not screech. The sound that emanates from her throat is a low tectonic hiss, a vibration that rattles the loose stones on the floor. She is the queen of the high citadel, and she has never known an intruder who walked on two legs. The confrontation begins with a clash of biological imperatives, the territorial rage of the nester versus the desperate survival instinct of the starving. The bird rises, unfolding wings that scrape the ceiling of the cave, expanding her size to fill the visual field of the hominids. She is a wall of patterned brown and black, a mesmerizing display of intimidation designed to stop the heart of any challenger. The leader roars, a primal sound of defiance that cracks his voice and slams the butt of his spear against the ground. It is a bluff, a calculated performance of aggression to mask the terror that liquefies his bowels. The tribe joins him, screaming and stomping, a chaotic cacophony, intended to confuse the sensory inputs of the avian brain. But the matriarch is an apex predator, and she does not fear noise. With a movement faster than the human eye can track, she strikes her neck, extending like a firing piston. The massive beak, hooked and razor-sharp, snaps shut on the shoulder of a flanking male, shearing through fur and muscle with the ease of a blade through water. He is lifted off his feet and tossed aside like a rag doll, crashing against the cave wall with a sickening thud. The scream of pain that follows is raw and horrifying, cutting through the bluster of the tribe and revealing the fragility of their flesh. The first blood has been drawn, and the smell of it drives the bird into a frenzy of killing intent. The tribe wavers the line of defense, buckling as the biological reality of the monster overwhelms their courage. They scramble back their heels, skidding on the guano-slicked floor, their spears jabbing uselessly at the wall of feathers. The stone points glance off the thick quill shafts, finding no purchase in the armor of the wing. The bird advances her talons, clicking on the stone, her head bobbing with a jerky rhythmic menace as she selects her next victim. In the confined space of the cave, the advantage of flight is lost, but the advantage of mass and reach remains absolute. They are trapped in a dead end with a dinosaur that refused to die, and they are losing. In the center of the panic, the firekeeper falls to her knees, not in surrender, but in a frantic attempt to birth the weapon. She dumps the contents of her bundle onto a flat rock, the glowing ember, the dry moss, the last twists of fibrous bark. Her hands shake violently, making the delicate operation a nightmare of clumsiness, but she forces her fingers to work. She blows on the coal, her cheeks puffing out, feeding oxygen to the fading heat. A wisp of smoke turns into a thick grey coil, then a spark jumps, catching the dry tinder. The flame erupts with a sudden audible whoosh, a tongue of yellow and orange that leaps up, painting the cave walls in dancing manic shadows. The effect on the matriarch is instantaneous and profound. For millions of years, her genetic lineage has known only one enemy that cannot be fought: the forest fire, the lightning strike, the red destruction that consumes the world. The sudden appearance of this elemental force inside her sanctuary short-circuits her predatory programming. She recoils her head, snapping back her hiss, turning into a confused, gargling shriek. The pupil of her eye contracts to a pinprick, fixated on the dancing light that defies the cold and the dark. The firekeeper thrusts a larger branch into the heart of the flame, the resinous wood catching quickly, creating a torch that blazes with a fierce, crackling intensity. The leader sees the hesitation, the crack in the armor of the beast's dominance. He snatches the torch from the firekeeper, ignoring the heat that blisters his hand, and steps forward. He is no longer just a biological organism. He is the bearer of the sun, the master of the chemical reaction. He swings the torch in a wide arc, the flames roaring as they cut through the air, trailing sparks like falling stars. He thrusts the fire toward the bird's face, shouting a guttural command that has no words, only intent. The bird screeches a sound of pure terror and scrambles backward, her massive talons scraping sparks from the granite floor. The smell of singing feathers fills the cave, a pungent, acrid odor of burning keratin that signals the turning of the tide. The tribe, sensing the shift in power, surges forward, their fear transmuting into a mob fury. They pick up stones, burning brands, anything they can throw, bombarding the giant creature with a hail of debris. They are a pack of wolves, now emboldened by the magic of the fire driving the bear from the den. The cave echoes with a new sound, not the silence of the hunt, but the roar of the conquest. The shadows cast by the fire make the hominids look like giants, their forms stretching up the walls, towering over the cowering predator. The matriarch is driven to the lip of the cave, the storm outside raging with the fury of a hurricane. She is caught between the hammer of the elements and the anvil of the fire. Behind her, the wind howls a vortex of snow and ice that promises a brutal death. Before her, the fire snaps and bites, wielded by the apes who have stolen her power. She snaps her beak one last time, a futile gesture of defiance. But the leader thrusts the torch closer, singing the sensitive skin around her eyes. The heat is intolerable. The instinct to flee the fire overrides the instinct to hold the ground. With a scream that sounds like the tearing of metal, the great bird turns and throws herself into the void. She spreads her wings, catching the violent updraft of the storm, and is instantly swept away, a dark rag tossed into the white chaos of the blizzard. She does not fly so much as she is erased, swallowed by the wall of snow that obscures the world beyond the cliff. The wind howls in triumph, or perhaps in anger, rushing into the vacuum she left behind. The cave is suddenly empty of the monster, leaving only the heavy breathing of the conquerors and the crackle of the burning wood. The tribe stands at the edge of the abyss, looking out into the swirling white nothingness where the god of the sky vanished. They are trembling not from cold but from the adrenaline crash, the chemical aftershock of the impossible victory. The leader lowers the torch, the flame illuminating his face, which is smeared with soot and blood. He looks at his hands at the tool that is not stone, and then back at the tribe. They are battered, bleeding and exhausted, but they are standing in the dry, windless shelter of the high earth. They have displaced the apex predator. They have taken the castle. They turn back toward the depths of the cave, the firelight, revealing the true prize of the conquest. The floor is dry, protected from the biting wind by the geometry of the rock. In the back, lined with soft down and fur, is the nest itself, a massive structure of warmth that can hold the entire tribe. And in the center of the nest, abandoned by the fleeing mother, are 2 eggs, enormous spheres of speckled white, radiating a faint warmth. Food, a massive protein-rich bounty that will sustain them through the heart of the blizzard. The universe has provided not through charity, but through the right of conquest. The firekeeper moves to the center of the cave, to a depression in the rock that seems designed by the earth to hold the heat. She builds the fire higher, feeding it the dried wood from the bird's nest, transforming the structure of the enemy into the hearth of the home. The smoke rises, catching a draft that pulls it up toward the ceiling, and out through a fissure, a natural chimney that keeps the air breathable. The orange glow expands, pushing the shadows back into the corners, turning the cold grey stone into walls of gold and amber. The temperature in the cave begins to rise, a slow, miraculous climbing of the mercury that signals the end of the freezing death. The wounded male is dragged near the fire, his lacerated shoulder packed with snow to staunch the bleeding. The others gather around the flames, their eyes wide and fixated on the dancing light. They strip the wet, frozen furs from their bodies, hanging them on the rocks to dry, exposing their skin to the radiant heat. It is a sensation they have not felt in weeks, a luxury that feels almost narcotic. The tension leaves their muscles, replaced by a profound, heavy exhaustion. They are safe. The wind screams outside, battering the mountain with the force of 1,000,000 hammers, but it cannot touch them here. The leader sits at the entrance, watching the storm, his silhouette guarding the threshold. He does not sleep yet. He listens to the wind, to the absence of the screech, to the steady crackle of the fire behind him. He understands in a way that transcends language that the world has changed. They are no longer just animals running from the winter. They are the keepers of the flame, the slayers of the monster, the dwellers in the high stone. This is not just a shelter, it is a fortress. And as the night deepens, the first true night of safety in their lives, the eagle's nest ceases to be the domain of the bird and becomes the cradle of the future. The storm that swallows the world outside the cave is a cataclysm of meteorological violence, a white hurricane that scours the face of the mountain with ice crystals hard enough to etch stone. It screams across the mouth of the cavern, a physical barrier of wind and noise that seals the entrance as effectively as a solid door. But inside the high chamber, the atmosphere is one of hushed reverence and miraculous stillness. The roar of the blizzard is muffled to a distant rhythmic drumming, a background static that underscores the crackle of the fire. The air here is still warm and thick with the smell of wood smoke, a sensory cocoon that wraps around the survivors. They are suspended in a pocket of existence that defies the frozen hell raging just a few feet away. For the first time in months, the biological machinery of the tribe is allowed to shift from the frantic overdrive of survival to the slow, deep rhythm of recovery. The shivering, which had become a permanent state of being for every member, finally ceases, the muscles relaxing as the ambient temperature of the cave rises above freezing. The blood no longer needed solely to protect the vital organs returns to the extremities, bringing a painful but welcome flush of heat to the fingers and toes. They sprawl on the dry floor, their limbs heavy and loose, their eyes watching the flames with a glazed, hypnotic intensity. It is the physiological ecstasy of safety, a drug more potent than any narcotic, washing away the cortisol that has poisoned their blood for weeks. The feast that follows is a silent, savage celebration of life, centered around the massive eggs looted from the Titan's nest. The shells are thick and pebbled, requiring the force of a hand axe to crack, revealing the rich golden yolk and the developing embryo inside. This is high-density energy, a concentrated bomb of fat and protein that the starving bodies of the hominids crave with a desperate hunger. There is no ritual in the eating, only the primal mechanics of consumption. They scoop the contents out with their hands, smearing the yellow nutrient over their faces, swallowing without chewing, their stomachs cramping, and then rejoicing at the sudden influx of calories. As the hunger recedes, the social fabric of the tribe begins to knit itself back together, repairing the fraying bonds caused by the stress of the migration. The grooming rituals return the gentle picking through fur to remove parasites and debris, a tactile language of affection and reassurance. The females huddle together, their soft chirps and purrs echoing off the stone walls, reinforcing the hierarchy and the connections of the group. The firekeeper tends to the wounded male, applying a poultice of chewed moss and ash to the lacerations on his shoulder. The pain is there, sharp and throbbing, but the fear of death has vanished, replaced by the collective will to heal. The cave itself, once the terrifying lair of the monster, is rapidly repurposed by the adaptable intelligence of the new tenants. The massive structure of the eagle's nest, built from branches as thick as a man's arm and lined with the fur of 1,000 kills, is dismantled and redistributed. The wood becomes a stockpile of fuel, stacked neatly against the dry wall, a treasury of trapped sunlight that guarantees the fire will not die. The hollow bones of the prey animals scavenged from the floor are tested for weight and balance. The sharp breaks identified as potential scrapers and awls. Nothing is wasted. In the economy of the Ice Age, trash is a concept that does not yet exist. The leader moves to the back of the cave, exploring the depth of the shadow where the firelight fades into darkness. He finds a trickle of water filtering through a crack in the limestone, a natural cistern that remains unfrozen due to the geothermal warmth of the deep earth. He cups his hands, drinking the clear, mineral-rich fluid, feeling it wash away the grit of the climb. This is the final piece of the survival puzzle: shelter, heat, food, and water. The eagle's nest is not just a temporary refuge. It is a fortress, a biosphere that can sustain them through the heart of the glacial maximum. He turns back to look at his tribe, his silhouette framed by the wet rock, and for the first time his shoulders drop. Sleep comes to them not as a fitful, terrified dozing, but as a deep, comatose slumber that shuts down the higher brain functions. They pile together in the center of the dismantled nest, a mound of breathing fur and warm flesh, buried under the scavenged hides and the feathers of the fallen matriarch. There are no sentries posted tonight, for the storm is the ultimate guard. Nothing can climb the mountain in this weather, and nothing can fly in this wind. They dream of green savannas and endless sun, their minds processing the trauma of the ascent and burying it in the subconscious, turning the horror of the climb into the mythology of the dreamtime. Hours pass, or perhaps days. Time loses its meaning in the dark comfort of the cave, measured only by the rhythmic feeding of the fire. Outside, the storm eventually exhausts its fury. the wind dying down from a scream to a whisper, the snow settling into a heavy, silent blanket. The light at the cave mouth changes, shifting from the grey gloom of the tempest to a crystalline, piercing blue. The leader is the first to wake his internal clock, tuned to the rhythm of the dawn. He stands, stretching his stiff limbs, and walks to the entrance, stepping over the threshold onto the ledge, where they had fought the battle for their lives. The view that greets him is a vision of a planet rebooted by ice, a spectacle of terrifying beauty that stretches to the curve of the horizon. The world below is gone, buried under a sea of clouds that roils and churns like a slow-motion ocean of milk. Only the highest peaks pierce this layer, standing like black islands in the white void, their jagged summits catching the first rays of the sun. The sky above is a deep, impossible azure, scrubbed clean of dust and moisture, vibrating with a clarity that hurts the eyes. The sun itself is a brilliant, blinding star rising over the eastern range, casting long shadows that stretch across the cloud tops. He looks down past the ledge into the abyss, where the clouds obscure the frozen plains of their ancestors. There is a profound psychological shift in this perspective, a realignment of the hominid's place in the universe. For millions of years, his kind has looked up at the trees, at the mountains, at the predators, at the stars. To look down is the prerogative of the gods and the birds. By claiming the high ground, they have elevated themselves above the struggle of the mud and the snow. They are no longer the rats in the grass. They are the watchers on the wall. The vertical hierarchy has been inverted. The rest of the tribe joins him, blinking in the fierce light, shielding their eyes with hands that are now warm and steady. They crowd the ledge, looking out at the empire of ice they have conquered. There is no sound of celebration, no hooting or chest beating, only a solemn collective intake of the thin, cold air. They understand the magnitude of their position. Below them, in the white silence, the mammoths are dying, the wolves are freezing, and the other bands of wanderers are perishing in the drifts. But here, above the weather, above the clouds, they are alive. They have cheated the extinction event. The firekeeper brings out the feathers of the great eagle, long, stiff quills of black and brown that were once instruments of their terror. She begins to weave them into the hair of the leader, tying them with sinew, creating a crown of keratin that radiates from his head like the rays of the sun. It is a symbolic appropriation of power, a visual statement that the strength of the bird has been absorbed by the man. He is no longer just a pack leader. He is the Eagle King, the master of the high rock. The others follow suit, adorning themselves with the trophies of the kill, transforming their appearance from ragged refugees into a warrior caste of the peaks. The winter will be long, a siege of darkness and ice that will last for generations, turning the earth into a snowball of hostility. But the equation of survival has been solved. They have the cave, which goes deep and stays warm. They have the fire, which they now know how to transport and feed. They have the high ground, which protects them from the ambush of the plains. They will learn to hunt the mountain goats, to trap the marmots, to navigate the treacherous ridges. They will adapt, their bodies growing stockier, their lungs larger, their blood thicker. They will cease to be wanderers and will become the mountain people. In the corner of the cave, the embers of the fire glow with a steady, reassuring pulse, the heart of the new home. This fire will not go out. It will be tended with religious zeal, fed by the hands of the children and the grandchildren who will be born on this stone floor. It will become the focal point of their culture, the storyteller's hearth, the altar of the ancestors. Around this fire, the grunts and gestures will slowly evolve into complex language, driven by the need to describe the strategy of the hunt and the history of the climb. The eagle's nest is the incubator, where the mind of man will sharpen, honed by the isolation and the beauty of the heights. The camera of history pulls back, leaving the intimacy of the ledge soaring upwards into the stratosphere. The figures on the cliff become small, dark specks, insignificant against the vast, crushing scale of the mountain range. The cave mouth is just a tiny shadow in a wall of granite that has stood for eons. But inside that shadow there is a flicker of orange light, a microscopic spark in the endless blue and white of the Ice Age. It is a fragile thing, this light easily extinguished by a gust of wind or a moment of carelessness, yet it burns. It burns through the night, through the storm, through the centuries. It is the beacon of a species that refuses to accept the verdict of nature. The great herds will vanish, the glaciers will retreat, and the shape of the continents will change. But the descendants of the cliff dwellers will walk down from the mountains, carrying the fire in their hands and the memory of the eagle in their minds. They will spread across the thawing world, building new nests of stone and steel, reaching ever higher, driven by the ancestral memory of the time when they conquered the sky. The wind blows over the peak, carrying the snow into the void, erasing the footprints on the ledge. But the fire remains. The silence of the millions of years returns, but it is no longer absolute. Deep within the rock there is the sound of a voice humming a low rhythmic tune. It is the sound of the human spirit settling in for the long wait, warm and undefeated in the heart of the winter.
Deep within the cavern, we find a rare glimpse into the daily life of early Homo sapiens.